Welcome to our sleep video series, your easiest path to drifting off naturally. These videos are designed to gently guide your mind toward rest. They work in a few simple ways. First, we give your mind something lightly engaging to focus on, not too exciting, not too dull. Just enough to keep your thoughts from wandering, but not enough to keep you awake. Next, through our proprietary neuro-relaxation technique, the pacing of the audio gradually slows as the video progresses. This subtle change encourages your mind to slow with it. The slowdown doesn't happen in a straight line. It follows carefully crafted patterns proven to support deeper relaxation. Finally, every element of the audio is intentionally calm, steady, and pleasantly boring, perfect for helping your mind settle into sleep. Before we begin, I encourage you to subscribe so you always have a new video ready for bedtime. And in return for these videos, we ask just one small favor. Please like the video and tell us in the comments where you're listening from, your city, state, or country, and what time it is for you. It motivates our team, helps us understand what's working, and builds a worldwide community of people who fall asleep together each night. It's always inspiring to see how others use these videos. Now, find a comfortable position, close your eyes, and let yourself unwind.
If you have never experienced the unique, pungent aroma of your own eyebrows disintegrating into ash, let me tell you. It smells like sulfur, panic, and poor life choices. It is a smell that lingers, much like the heat radiating from the snout of a 40-ton reptile currently looming over you, demanding to know why the amuse-bouche lacks textural complexity. My name is Elias. Once, I was the toast of the capital. I was the chef de cuisine at the Gilded Pheasant, a place where the nobility would trade their second-born children for a reservation and a taste of my truffle-infused risotto. I had stars. I had accolades. I had a sauce spoon made of solid silver that I kept in my breast pocket like a talisman of culinary superiority. Then came the great flambé incident of the summer solstice. I still maintain that the sous chef used too much brandy, but the insurance adjusters and the royal magistrate disagreed. When the Gilded Pheasant burned down, it took my reputation, my savings, and the hair on my forearms with it. Bankrupt, blacklisted, and desperate, I found myself staring at a crumpled parchment pinned to the rotting notice board of a tavern that smelled exclusively of wet dog and despair. Wanted, it read, in a calligraphy that looked suspiciously like it had been written in blood or perhaps a very rich berry coulis. Personal phagician. Executive gastronomer. Chef. Location, High Peak. Client, discriminating. Salary, your weight in gold, payable upon survival. I should have stopped reading at survival. Any job posting that lists survival as a conditional clause for payment is a red flag the size of a cathedral tapestry. But I was hungry, not just for food, but for redemption. And frankly, the debt collectors for the Spatula Guild were getting aggressive with their knee-breaking threats. So, I packed my knife roll, my lucky heavy-bottomed copper saucepan, and a satchel of essential salts, and I began the climb. The journey to High Peak was not a stroll. It was a vertical punishment. For 3 days, I scrambled over jagged rocks that seemed designed by a geographer with a personal vendetta against human ankles. The air grew thin, tasting of ozone and snow. My lungs burned, my legs screamed, and my copper pan clanked against my spine with every step, a metallic metronome counting down the moments until my likely demise. By the time I reached the mouth of the lair, I was a shivering, wheezing mess. The entrance was a gaping maw in the mountainside, framed by obsidian stalactites that looked uncomfortably like teeth. A warm, rhythmic wind blew from the darkness, a cave breathing. It smelled of wood smoke, cooked meat, and something ancient and metallic. "Hello," I called out, my voice cracked. It was a pathetic sound, like a mouse asking a hawk for directions. "I'm here about the position." Silence answered me, heavy and thick. Then the ground verifiably trembled. It wasn't an earthquake, it was footsteps. Heavy, lumbering impacts that vibrated through the soles of my boots and rattled my teeth. From the shadows, 2 eyes opened. They were the size of carriage wheels, slitted vertically, burning with a molten gold luminescence that illuminated the cavern walls. As the creature stepped into the shaft of sunlight piercing the gloom, my breath hitched in my throat. I assumed it was a he, based on the deep baritone rumbling in his chest, was magnificent, and terrified, and terrifying, mostly terrifying. Drakar was an iridescent nightmare of emerald and sapphire scales, shimmering like an oil slick in a puddle. His wings were folded tight against a back that looked like a mountain range in miniature. Smoke curled lazily from nostrils that could easily fit my entire head with room for a side salad. And surrounding him, piled high in mounds that scraped the cavern ceiling, was gold. Not just coins, goblets, plates, crowns, scepters, jewelry. It was a hoard that would make a king weep with envy. And there he sat, a dragon right out of the storybooks, looking down at me with an expression of profound boredom. "You represent the applicant?" the dragon asked. His voice was like gravel tumbling inside a church bell, deep, resonant, and loud enough to vibrate my sternum. I am the applicant," I squeaked. I cleared my throat and tried to summon the dignity of a chef de cuisine. "I am Elias, master of the saucier's art, former head of the gilded pheasant." The dragon lowered his massive head until he was inches from my face. The heat radiating from him was like opening an oven door to check a roast. I could see the individual scratches on his scales, the intelligence swimming in those golden eyes, and, distressingly, a piece of charred armor stuck between his teeth like a popcorn hull. "You are small," Drakar observed. "The last one was meteor." "I rely on flavor, not bulk," I said, my voice trembling only slightly. "And I assume the last chef didn't work out." "He lacked imagination," Drakar grumbled, pulling his head back. "And he oversalted the mutton. I let him go." "Let him go?" I asked, hopeful. "Digesting is a form of letting go, eventually," Drakar said. He turned his massive bulk, his tail sweeping a pile of ruby-encrusted chalices across the stone floor with a deafening clatter. "Come, the galley awaits. I am famished, and if I have to eat another raw mountain goat, I shall set this entire mountain range on fire out of sheer culinary boredom." I followed him deeper into the cave, stepping carefully over piles of gold coins that shifted like sand dunes. We passed skeletons, some in armor, some in chef's whites. I tried not to look at them. "Focus on the job, Elias. Focus on the Messian place." The kitchen was, surprisingly, a dream. It was carved directly into a side cavern, utilizing natural geothermal vents. There were flat slabs of polished obsidian that served as countertops, naturally heated pools of water for boiling, and a literal hole in the floor that glowed red with magma, the ultimate high-heat burner. But it was also a disaster zone of scale. The knives were the size of claymores. The mixing bowls were cauldrons. Everything was covered in a layer of soot. "Here is your domain," Drakar announced, gesturing with a claw the size of a scimitar. "The pantry is in the back, stocked with whatever my minions could scavenge from the trade caravans. You have 1 hour." "1 hour for what?" "Lunch," Drakar hissed. "Impress me, little chef. My palate is refined. I crave depth. I crave heat. I crave a symphony of flavor that dances upon the tongue like a sprite in spring. Do not disappoint me." He turned and lumbered back toward his gold hoard, leaving me standing alone in a kitchen designed for a giant, staring at a magma vent and wondering how one creates a symphony for a lizard the size of a galleon. I scrambled to the pantry. It was a chaotic mess of crates and barrels. Sacks of flour, barrels of wine, salted meats, and random livestock that looked very unhappy to be there. I found a side of beef, an entire cow actually hanging from a hook. It would have to do. I went to work. The fear began to recede, replaced by the familiar, comforting adrenaline of the dinner rush. I didn't have my usual brigade of sous chefs, but I had my knife. I broke down the cow, my blade flying. I couldn't cook the whole thing in an hour, but I could butcher the prime cuts. I selected the ribeyes, massive slabs of meat marbled with beautiful white fat. I needed a rub, a marinade, something bold. I raided the spice sacks. Black peppercorns crushed with the flat of my blade, sea salt, dried garlic, a handful of herbs that smelled like thyme but looked purple. I didn't question it. Heating the obsidian slab was tricky. I had to shovel hot coals from a side vent under the stone. It took 10 minutes to get it to searing temperature, testing it by flicking a drop of water and watching it dance and evaporate instantly. Perfect. I slapped the steaks onto the stone. The sound was a glorious hiss, a sizzle that echoed off the cave walls. Smoke billowed up, carrying the scent of roasting meat and caramelizing fat. I moved quickly, flipping the meat, basting it with a horrific amount of butter I found in a cooling crock. Splash of red wine to deglaze, reduce, mount with more butter. It was primitive cooking, caveman style, but executed with the precision of a master. I plated the mountain of meat, about 40 pounds of ribeye, onto a golden shield I found leaning against the wall, arranging it in a fan pattern. I poured the reduction sauce over it, garnishing with fresh herbs. I wiped the sweat and soot from my forehead. It looked good. It smelled incredible. "Service!" I yelled, my voice echoing into the darkness. Drakar appeared almost instantly, sliding out of the shadows. He loomed over the golden shield, his nostrils flaring as he inhaled the steam rising from the meat. "Presentation is acceptable," he rumbled. "Rustic, a bit pedestrian." "It's a classic steak-au-poivre, interpreted for the local terroir," I said quickly, bowing low. Drakar leaned down. He didn't use a fork. He extended a long, forked tongue, wrapping it around a 10-pound slab of beef and pulling it into his maw with a wet slap. I held my breath. This was it. Life or death, professional validation or digestion. The dragon chewed, a slow, grinding motion of his jaw, his eyes half closed. He swallowed. The sound was like a boulder dropping into a well. He stared at me. The silence stretched for an eternity. I could hear my own heart hammering against my ribs. "Well," I squeaked. Drakar exhaled. A puff of gray smoke hit me in the face, smelling of seared steak and disappointment. "Bland," he said. "Bland," I choked. "That sauce was reduced for 20 minutes. The peppercorns were freshly crushed. It has notes of oak and blackberry." "Notes," Drakar roared, and this time the volume knocked me backward. "I do not want notes, little chef. I want a concerto. I am a dragon. My taste buds have been seared by the fires of 1,000 battles. This tastes like wet cardboard soaked in milk." "It's a prime ribeye," I protested, scrambling to my feet, my professional pride momentarily overriding my survival instinct. "Maybe your palate is the problem. Maybe you've burned off your taste buds breathing fire on everything." The cave went silent. The temperature spiked. Drakar's golden eyes narrowed into slits of pure malice. His throat began to glow, an inner light building from dull orange to blinding white. "My palate is imperfect," he hissed. He leaned forward. He didn't roar, he just huffed. It wasn't a full breath of fire. It was a sneeze, a warning shot. A brief, concentrated jet of blue flame that shot from his nostrils, engulfed my head for a microsecond, and vanished. I stood there, blinking. I wasn't dead. My skin wasn't melting, but there was a distinct lightness on my forehead. I reached up and touched the space above my eyes. Smooth, entirely hairless. Gone, along with the front tuft of my hair. "Next time," Drakar said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, serpentine whisper, "you will be the brioche." I stood paralyzed, smelling the sulfur and regret I mentioned earlier. "However," Drakar continued, leaning back and picking his teeth with a talon, "I am willing to give you a chance to redeem this culinary insult. The meat was cooked correctly. The texture was adequate. It is the zing that is missing. The punch." "Punch," I repeated dully, mourning my eyebrows. "I require spice," Drakar said. "Real spice. Not this dust you sweep off the floor of a caravan. I need heat that matches the fire in my blood." He turned his head and looked toward the back of the cave, where a dark, foreboding tunnel spiraled down into the earth. "There is a root," Drakar said, his eyes gleaming with a greedy hunger. "It grows only in the forbidden caverns of the deep dark, nurtured by the guano of fluorescent bats and the tears of lost adventurers. It is called wormroot. Wormroot, I said, sounds spicy. It is agony, Drakar said dreamily. It is flavor incarnate. It burns with the cold fire of the netherworld. One pinch can make a grown man weep for his mother. I need it, for a curry. A curry, I said. You want me to make a dragon curry? Yes, Drakar snapped, and you will need the wormroot. Go fetch it. And now. I am still hungry, Elias, Drakar said, his voice vibrating the floorboards. And you look increasingly edible. I suggest you start walking before I decide that roasted chef is the only spicy thing on the menu. I looked at the dark tunnel. I looked at the massive, hungry dragon. I touched my hairless brow. Right, I said, grabbing my satchel. Wormroot, forbidden caverns, fluorescent bat guano, got it. Oh, and Elias. Drakar called out as I began to retreat toward the terrifying darkness of the lower tunnels. I turned back. Yes, your immensity. If you find any mushrooms down there, the blue ones with the screaming faces. Yes. Don't use those, they give me gas, and you do not want to be in a confined space when I have gas. Noted, I said. I turned and walked into the dark, my copper pan banging softly against my hip, wondering if the Spatula Guild's knee breakers were really that bad after all. At least they didn't eat you. Usually. The tunnel to the forbidden caverns wasn't just dark. It was an aggressive kind of darkness, the sort that seemed to actively eat the light from my sputtering torch. The air grew humid and thick, smelling of wet earth and mushrooms. As I descended, I thought about my life choices. I thought about the perfect bechamel. I thought about the girl back in the capital who sold violets and how she probably wouldn't recognize me without eyebrows. And I realized something. I was a chef. I had survived the lunch rush on Mother's Day. I had dealt with health inspectors who wielded clipboards of doom. I had managed a kitchen staff of hungover pirates and emotional artists. I could handle a darker hole in the ground. I could handle a spicy root. I had to, because the alternative was becoming a light snack for a lizard with the table manners of a woodchipper. Wormroot, I muttered to myself, stepping over a puddle that hissed. It's just a vegetable. It's just an ingredient. I'll find it. I'll cook it. I'll make the best damn curry that oversized gecko has ever tasted. Something skittered in the darkness ahead of me. Something with too many legs. And, I added, gripping the handle of my heavy saucepan tighter, I'll probably die trying. I took a deep breath, choked on the sulfur, and kept walking. End of part 1. The darkness of the tunnel wasn't just an absence of light. It was a physical weight, a heavy, velvet blanket that smelled of damp stone and things that crawl. I navigated by keeping one hand on the slimy wall and the other gripping the handle of my copper saucepan so tightly my knuckles were probably white, assuming there was enough light to see them, which there wasn't. The instructions for finding wormroot had been vague at best. Forbidden caverns implies a singular location, but in reality, the mountain's underbelly was a labyrinth of twisting chutes, magma tubes, and sudden drops that whistled with the wind of the abyss. I walked for what felt like hours, my chef's clogs clacking rhythmically against the stone, a dinner beat for whatever was hunting me. And something was hunting me. The skittering I'd heard earlier had coalesced into a horde of clicking, chirping sounds, accompanied by the soft, bioluminescent glow of a dozen floating eyes. I rounded a corner and found myself in a cavern that looked like a glitter factory had exploded inside a cathedral. Giant, glowing mushrooms, the size of parasols lined the walls, pulsing in shades of neon blue and bruised purple. And tending to these mushrooms were small, gnarled figures with skin like wet leather and ears that could receive satellite signals. Goblins, of course. They froze, I froze. One of them, wearing a loincloth made of what looked like bat wings, pointed a jagged spear at my midsection. Intruder, he screeched. His voice sounded like a fork scratching a ceramic plate. Fresh meat for the mulch pile. Wait, I yelled, brandishing my saucepan like a shield. I am not meat, I am a chef. The goblin paused, his spear wavering. Chef. Yes, a culinarian, an artist of the edible. I took a gamble. I notice your fungal cultivation is robust. Are those blue-veined shriekers? Excellent for ragu, provided you bleed the toxins first. The goblins exchanged glances. The leader lowered his spear slightly. You know the shrieker. Know it, I've flamed it in brandy, I lied. I had no idea what a shrieker was, but it sounded dangerous enough to be a delicacy. I am Elias, personal chef to the dragon Drakar, and I am on a quest for the wormroot. A collective gasp rippled through the goblin ranks. They took 3 steps back. The root of burning regret, the leader whispered. You seek the death spice. The boss has a cold palate, I said with a shrug that I hoped looked nonchalant rather than terrified. He needs heat. Show me the way, and I promise not to tell him about this delightful little farm you have here. He thinks this tunnel is just for bats. He hates bats. If he knew there were plump, juicy goblins down here. I let the threat hang in the damp air, like the scent of overripe cheese. The leader swallowed audibly. He pointed a trembling, clawed finger toward a chasm at the far end of the cave, where a red glow pulsed like a heartbeat. Down the sulfur slide, past the boiling mud. It grows on the edge of the magma fall. Do not touch it with bare skin, chef, it bites. Much obliged, I said, bowing stiffly. I marched past them, trying to keep my knees from knocking together. The heat grew intense as I descended the sulfur slide, which was, thankfully, a path and not an actual slide. The air turned dry and searing. I rounded the final bend and saw it. The magma fall was a waterfall of liquid fire cascading into a lake of molten rock. And there, clinging to the obsidian cliff edge, bathed in the orange spray of the lava, were twisted, gnarly roots. They didn't look like vegetables. They looked like solidified anger. They were dark red, vehemently spiked, and they were actually smoking. I pulled a pair of heavy iron tongs from my satchel. I approached the nearest root. The heat radiating from the plant itself rivaled the lava below. I clamped the tongs around the tuber. The plant shrieked. I don't mean it squeaked. I mean it let out a high-pitched, audible scream that echoed off the canyon walls. I yanked hard. The root came free with a sickening snap, spraying a drop of crimson sap onto my boot, which instantly began to hiss and dissolve the leather. Right, I wheezed, dropping the screaming vegetable into my thickest canvas sack. Wormroot acquired, panic attack imminent, time to go. The climb back was a blur of adrenaline and sweat. By the time I stumbled back into the main kitchen cavern, I looked like I'd been deep-fried. Soot coated my skin, my tunic was scorched, and I smelled of brimstone. Drakar was waiting. He was draped over a pile of golden shields, watching the entrance with one eye open. You took your time, the dragon rumbled. I have grown faint with hunger. I was gone for 40 minutes, I panted, dropping the sack on the obsidian counter. And I had to negotiate with mushroom farmers. Farmers, disgusting, did you get it? I opened the sack with the tongs. The wormroot sat there, glowing faintly and humming a low, ominous note. Ah, Drakar said, sitting up, the coins cascading off his back sounding like a hailstorm. The aroma, it smells like agony perfect. It screamed when I picked it, I noted. Flavor is pain leaving the body, Drakar said philosophically. Now, the curry, I want it rich, Elias. I want it to coat the throat like liquid velvet and burn like a treasonous love affair. I went to work, and let me tell you, cooking with magical ingredients is not like chopping carrots. When I sliced the wormroot, the fumes made my eyes water so badly I was effectively blind for 3 minutes. The sap tried to eat through my cutting board. I had to sauté it in a pan hovering 3 inches above the fire because direct contact with the heat caused distinct, mini explosions. But I was a professional. I built a base of coconut milk, squeezed from coconuts I found in a crate marked loot from the Southern Isles, and tempered the wormroot with turmeric, cumin, and a dash of powdered ghost pepper I had in my kit. The sauce turned a violent, glowing orange. I ladled it over a bed of roasted mountain goat. Drakar loved goat, provided it wasn't gamey. which is a paradoxical requirement for a goat, and garnished it with cilantro. "Service," I called out, my voice hoarse from the fumes. Drakar approached the counter. He loomed over the steaming trough of curry. He sniffed. The orange steam curled into his nasal cavities. He didn't sneeze this time. He smiled, a terrifying expression that exposed rows of teeth the size of daggers. "Interesting," he purred. He lowered his head and lapped up the curry. The sound of gallons of spicy sauce disappearing was impressive. He finished the trough, licked the obsidian clean, and sat back. I waited. My eyebrows, or the raw pink skin where they utilized to be, tingled. "The heat," Drakar began, his eyes glazing over, "is acceptable. It warms the gizzard. Yes, good." I exhaled, my shoulders sagging in relief. "Excellent, I'm glad you." "However," Drakar interrupted, holding up a single claw, "the texture of the goat, it was stringy." "It was a mountain goat," I said defensively. "They are literally made of muscle and stubbornness." "It required 3 chews," Drakar said, his tone hardening. "I prefer a melt-in-the-mouth consistency. 2 chews maximum, and the sauce, while spicy, it lacked structure." "Structure, it's a liquid." "Don't get petulant with me, tiny chef," Drakar huffed. He leaned in closer. "Next time, braise the meat for 3 days, or summon a softer animal. Do you know how to summon a phoenix?" "No," I said. "I went to culinary school, not wizard college." "Pity," Drakar said. Then he burped. A small ball of fire, no larger than a beach ball, escaped his lips. It drifted lazily toward me. I ducked. The fireball passed over my head, singing the very tips of the hair I had left on my scalp and obliterating a stack of wooden bowls behind me. "Excuse me," Drakar said, not looking sorry at all. "The spice gives me reflux. Now, for dinner, I desire seafood." I looked at the charred remains of the bowls. I touched my head. I was slowly becoming bald, one meal at a time. "We are in a mountain," I pointed out. "We are 300 miles from the ocean." "Details," Drakar waved a hand. "In the freezer, the cavern with the blue ice, you will find a block of glacial ice containing crystal shrimp. They have been frozen for 1,000 years. I want them, but be careful. They shatter if you look at them too harshly." "Crystal shrimp," I repeated. "And how would you like them prepared?" "Scampi," Drakar said, "but without the garlic." I froze. Scampi, without garlic, that's just butter and sadness. Drakar's eyes narrowed instantly. Smoke began to curl from his nostrils, darker this time. "Garlic," he hissed, "is the devil's bulb. It makes my scales itch. And if I eat raw garlic, I sneeze. Do you know what happens when a dragon sneezes, Elias?" "I assume it involves fire." "It involves a shockwave of plasma that can vaporize a stone joy hall. Last time I ate garlic, I accidentally deleted a village." "No, garlic." "Understood," I said quickly. "No garlic, 0 garlic. Garlic is forbidden." The rest of the afternoon was a nightmare of culinary physics. I found the crystal shrimp encased in a block of ice the size of a carriage. I had to chip them out using a chisel and a very tiny hammer. They were beautiful, translucent, glittering like diamonds, but true to his word, they were fragile. I broke 3 just by picking them up. To cook them without shattering them, I had to use a gentle poaching method involving melted snow water and lemon zest. I made a sauce using butter, white wine, and shallots, which I desperately hoped didn't count as garlic in the dragon's taxonomy of allergens. While the shrimp poached, I decided to tackle the phoenix issue. Drakar wanted soft meat. Fine. I found a dusty book in the pantry titled Edible Summonings for the Arcane Gourmand. I drew a circle on the floor using salt and paprika. I recited the incantation. "Ignis Bertus, deliciousus, come hear us." There was a flash of light, a squawk, and a bird the size of a turkey appeared in the circle. It was made entirely of fire. It looked around, saw me, and immediately tried to peck my eyes out. Catching a bird that is actively on fire is difficult. Killing it so it stays dead and doesn't just turn to ash and respawn is harder. I eventually managed to douse it in a bucket of heavy cream, which seemed to confuse its magical physiology long enough for me to get it into the oven. Dinner service arrived. I was exhausted. My hands were covered in burns from harvesting the root, cuts from the shrimp shards, and blisters from the phoenix wrangling. I presented the first course, crystal shrimp with lemon butter foam. Drakar plucked a shrimp delicately with 2 claws. He crunched it. It sounded like someone stepping on a light bulb. Texture, he mused. Crunchy, glassy, I like it, but the sauce. Yes, I asked, bracing myself. Is that shallot? It is a distant cousin of the onion, I stammered, strictly distinct from the garlic family. Drakar sniffed. He rubbed his snout. My left nostril itches, just a little, I will allow it, but you are walking a fine line, Elias, a very fine line. He ate the rest of the shrimp. I presented the main course, roast phoenix with a wormroot glaze. The bird was glowing softly. The meat was incredibly tender because it was constantly trying to turn back into energy. Drakar tore off a leg, he chewed. His eyes widened. Now this, he rumbled, is texture. It fights back but then surrenders, and the heat, yes. He ate voraciously. I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I was getting the hang of this. Maybe I wouldn't be eaten. However, Drakar said, pausing with a wing bone hanging from his mouth. My heart sank. Yes. It needs something, a finish, a top note. It is too heavy. It needs to be lifted. Lifted. It lacks an ethereal quality, Drakar said, tossing the bone over his shoulder where it clattered into the gold pile. Next time, procure shadow saffron. It must be harvested during a lunar eclipse from the garden of a necromancer. It tastes like melancholy. It would pair beautifully with the screaming root. Melancholy, I jotted down on a piece of scrap parchment, right under grow new skin. Right, shadow saffron, got it. But for now, Drakar said, patting his massive, scaled stomach, which sounded like a drum, I require a palate cleanser. This heat is lingering too long. I need something cool, something fresh, something green. I looked at my prep table. I had exhausted most of my greens on the garnish for the curry. I rummaged through the crate of herbs I had salvaged from the pantry earlier. I found a bunch of vibrant, glowing green leaves. They looked like mint, but crisper. They smelled divine, like winter air and starlight. I have just the thing, I said. I violently chopped the herbs, mixing them with some honey and yogurt to create a cooling Raita-style dip. Here you are, your magnificence, I said, placing the bowl before him. A cooling herbal infusion to soothe the fire. Drakar didn't hesitate. He scooped up the entire bowlful in one go. He hummed. Refreshing, sharp, floral, what is this delightful herb? I believe it's a wild mint variety, I said proudly. I found it in the back of the enchanted stasis box. Drakar froze, the chewing stopped. His eyes, usually a piercing gold, suddenly turned a milky white. The scales around his neck began to ripple. Mint, he choked. Did you say, wild mint? Yes, why? Did it have purple veins on the underside of the leaves? I thought back, yes, quite pretty actually. Drakar dropped the golden platter. It clanged loudly. He stood up, staggering slightly. His stomach, already large, made a sound like a dying whale, a deep, groaning gurgle that vibrated the entire cavern. That, Drakar wheezed, his voice sounding tight and squeezed. That was elven mint, mentha elficus. Is that bad? Drakar looked at me. His face was swelling. His snout, usually sleek and sharp, was puffing up like a rising loaf of bread. His eyelids were ballooning shut. Drakar gasped, A.M. Groon. His midsection visibly expanded. Scales creaked and popped as the dragon began to inflate. I am, deathly, allergic, to elves, he forced out, his tongue now too big for his mouth. And there, infernal, gardening. Oh gods, I whispered. Fix, Drakar tried to roar, but it came out as a high-pitched squeak. Fix, it. He hiccuped. It wasn't a fireball this time. It wasn't a puff of smoke. It was a belch of pure, concentrated magical gas. It shot out of his mouth, hit the far wall, and ignited. The explosion rocked the kitchen. "My tummy," Drakar whimpered, clutching a stomach that was now round as a boulder and pressing against the ceiling of the cave. "I feel pressurized." The air in the cavern began to shimmer with heat. He was overheating. His internal reactor was going critical. If a dragon explodes from an allergic reaction, it doesn't just make a mess. It makes a crater. "Don't explode," I yelled, grabbing my head. "Please don't explode. I haven't been paid yet." "Antidote," Drakar squeaked, rolling onto his back, his legs sticking up in the air like a dead beetle, his belly scraping the stalactites. "Make it stop." He let out another belch, this one green, which set my prep table on fire. I scrambled, antidote, allergy, elven mint. Think Elias, think, what counteracts elven magic, what counteracts swelling? I looked at the pantry. I looked at the sobbing, inflating dragon. I looked at the magma vent. This wasn't cooking anymore. This was chemical warfare. And I had about 30 seconds before my client became a bomb and I became the garnish. End of part 2. I stared at the inflating dragon, whose belly was now pressing so firmly against the ceiling that stalactites were snapping off like dry twigs. The air smelled of ozone, and impending doom. "Antidote," Drakar wheezed again, his voice an octave higher than a dragon's voice has any right to be. "The bloating. It feels like I swallowed a dirigible." I spun in a circle, my mind racing through every culinary textbook and alchemical pamphlet I'd ever skimmed. Elven magic, elven mint. It's light, airy, uplifting. Too uplifting in this case. To counter that, I needed something heavy, something grounding, something undeniably, aggressively earthy. "Roots," I shouted to no one. "I need roots, heavy ones, turnips, parsnips, mud-covered potatoes." I dove into the pantry, hurling crates aside. I found a sack of dwarven rock tubers, potatoes so dense they were occasionally used as cannonballs. Perfect. I needed acid to cut the magical alkalinity. Vinegar? No, not strong enough. "Dragon bile," I yelled, running back to the main cavern. "Drakar, drool into this bucket." "I am's not a tap," he strained, his eyes bulging. "Do it or pop your roundness." I shoved a galvanized bucket under his dripping jowls. A thick, viscous glob of green slime landed with a heavy splat. Back to the stove. I threw the rock tubers into the cauldron, skins and all. I poured in the bile. It hissed and turned a violent purple. I grabbed a handful of charcoal, carbon absorbs toxins, right? And crushed it into the mix. "It needs a binder," I muttered, sweat stinging my eyes. Something to hold the heaviness together. I spotted a jar of rendered lard. I dumped the entire thing in. "Eat this," I screamed, lugging the cauldron over to the dragon. Drakar couldn't move his head. I had to climb up his flank, which was stretched tight as a drumhead, and shovel the sludge directly into his mouth. "It tastes like dirt and failure," he groaned, swallowing with difficulty. "It's a rustic stew," I retorted, shoveling faster. He finished the cauldron. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, a low rumble started deep within the dragon. It wasn't the scary, fire precursor rumble. It was the sound of a drain unclogging. Gurgle. Drakar's belly visibly deflated a few inches. He let out a sigh that smelled of wet earth and old potatoes. "Better?" I asked, sliding down his side and hitting the floor. "Marginally," he grumbled, his voice dropping back to its normal baritone register. "Though I suspect I will be sluggish for a century. You are lucky, Elias. I was about to sneeze, and at this pressure, it would have leveled the mountain range." That was barely the beginning. If I thought the wormroot incident was bad, or the elven mint disaster was the peak of my suffering, I was laughably naive. I had entered a new circle of culinary hell, the routine. Life became a blur of near-death foraging and high-stakes catering. Drakar wasn't just hungry, he was bored. And a bored dragon with a limitless palate is a dangerous thing. "Inferno peppers," he announced one Tuesday, picking his teeth with a lance he'd pulled from a skeleton. I crave the heat of the nether hells. Volcano demons guard those, I pointed out, bandaging a burn on my arm from the previous day's soup mishap. Yes, they are quite rude. Don't engage them in conversation about politics, they have terrible opinions. Just grab the peppers and run. So I went. I dodged fireballs thrown by demons who looked like sentient lava lamps with anger issues. I came back with my tunic smoking and a basket of peppers that glowed red in the dark. I made a salsa that melted 3 spoons and one of my favorite ladles. Drakar complained it lacked citrus notes. Then it was moonbloom pollen. It must be harvested at midnight, Drakar instructed, examining a claw for blemishes. By a silent hand. If you make a sound, the Fae will turn your blood into grape jelly. Grape jelly. It's very uncomfortable and messy. I spent 6 hours crawling on my belly through a glade of singing grass, holding my breath, terrified that a sneeze, mine, or the pollen's would result in a gelatinous demise. I gathered enough glittering dust to fill a thimble. I used it to dust a soufflé. The soufflé, let's talk about the soufflé. Drakar wanted a dessert that was light as a cloud but rich as a kingdom. I whipped egg whites until my arms felt like they were going to fall off. I folded in the chocolate, the moonbloom pollen, and a dash of stardust I'd scraped from a fallen meteorite. I put it in the oven. It rose beautifully. It towered over the rim of the cauldron, a majestic, wobbling tower of chocolate perfection. I carried it out, walking as softly as a cat. Here, I whispered, the midnight soufflé. Drakar leaned in. The heat from his snout washed over the dessert. Vlap. The soufflé collapsed. It just gave up. It imploded into a sad, brown puddle at the bottom of the dish. Drakar stared at it. He looked at me. It fell, he said. It was the heat from your nose, I stammered. Thermal shock. It fell because it lacked conviction, Drakar roared. It had no structural integrity. A dessert must have pride, Elias. This is a puddle of cowardice. He huffed. A jet of flame shot out, singeing my eyebrows off again. I had just grown them back to a respectable stubble. My brows, I cried, clapping a hand to my forehead. They were uneven anyway, he scoffed. Do it again, and use dragon glass to reinforce the crust. The allergies, however, were the real Russian roulette of the job. It wasn't just the mint. It turned out Drakar had an immune system that was actively hostile to random, nonsensical things. One evening, I made a delightful herbaceous salad with dandelion greens. Simple, rustic. Drakar took one bite, his eyes crossed. Elias, he said, his voice trembling, is there, chicory, in this? Just a touch, for bitterness. I see, demons. What? The walls are melting, Drakar screamed, scrambling backward into his gold hoard. Great serpents are eating the sky. Elias, why do you have 6 heads, and why are they all judging me? He spent the next 4 hours hiding under a pile of shields, convinced I was a Hydra sent to audit his taxes. I had to sing him lullabies until the hallucinations wore off. Do you know any dragon lullabies? Neither did I improvised lyrics to the tune of Greensleeves about hoarding gold and eating knights. It seemed to soothe him. Another time it was cinnamon, just regular cinnamon. I sprinkled some on a roasted apple. Drakar ate it. 5 minutes later, he opened his mouth to speak, and a stream of green acid poured out, dissolving my best copper stockpot and sizzling a hole 3 feet deep into the stone floor. Oops, he said, watching the floor sizzle. Acid reflux, my bad. That's not reflux, I yelled, staring at the ruin of my cookware. That's industrial waste. It tingles, he complained, rubbing his throat. Fetch me a glacier to suck on. Despite the terror, the burns, and the constant threat of being turned into jelly or ash, there were moments. Late at night, when the fire in the magma vent died down to a dull glow and Drakar wasn't hungry, he would talk. He talked about the old age, about eating feasts prepared by kings in halls that no longer existed. He described the taste of a leviathan steak seasoned with salt from a dried-up sea. He spoke of wines pressed from grapes grown on the slopes of active volcanoes, vintages that tasted of ash and berries and history. "You have promise, little chef," he said one night, staring into the embers. "You lack the constitution of a giant, but you have the soul of a glutton. You understand that food is not just fuel, it is a story." I was touched. I was creating a bond with an ancient, magical predator. "That is very kind of you, Drakar," I said, feeling a warmth in my chest. "Yes," he mused. "Now go fetch me a barrel of wine from the sunken city of Atlantis. I'm thirsty." "Atlantis, that's underwater. Use a long straw, or hold your breath, I don't care. The 3000 BC vintage. Don't bring the 2999, it was a rainy year, tastes like wet dog." So the bond was fragile, mostly transactional. The climax of his pickiness came a week later. Drakar had been moody. He was shedding scales, which made him itchy and irritable. He swatted at his own tail like a cat. He rejected 5 meals in a row. Too salty, huff of fire. Too crunchy, tail swipe that destroyed a table. Not enough, existential dread, growl. Existential dread is not a flavor profile. I screamed, pulling at my hair. "What do you want? Tell me. I will cook anything. An angel, a demon, a sentient cheese." Drakar stopped pacing. He looked at me with eyes that swirled like molten gold. "The apex truffle," he whispered. The air in the cave grew cold. "The what?" "The apex truffle. It grows in the deepest fissure of the abyss. It is blacker than night. It absorbs all light around it. It is said to taste of everything you have ever loved and lost." "That sounds emotionally heavy," I said. "It is the ultimate umami," Drakar drooled. "I must have it with a risotto." "Risotto," I repeated. "Fine, abyss, truffle, risotto. I'll leave a note for my next of kin." The journey to the abyss was less of a hike and more of a fall. I descended into crevices where gravity felt like a suggestion. I fought off blind, albino spiders. I traded my favorite paring knife to a shadow merchant for safe passage. I found the truffle. It was sitting on a pedestal of black rock, surrounded by a void of silence. It didn't reflect light, it swallowed it. Looking at it made me want to cry about my childhood dog. It was perfect. I grabbed it, wrapped it in silk, and climbed for 2 days straight. I returned to the kitchen, battered, bruised, but triumphant. "I have it," I announced, holding up the black lump. Drakar's eyes widened. "The apex." I cooked. I put my soul into that risotto. I used arboreal rice imported from a pocket dimension. I used broth made from the bones of a golden ox. I stirred it for 40 minutes, lovingly, coaxingly. I shaved the truffle over the top. The flakes fell like dark snow, disappearing into the creamy white rice. The smell hit me. It smelled like my mother's kitchen, like my first victory, like the rain after a fire. "It is ready," I whispered. Drakar approached. He didn't rush. He moved with reverence. He lowered his head. He inhaled. "Magnificent," he rumbled. "Truly, Elias, you have outdone yourself." He opened his mouth. He took a massive bite, consuming the entire cauldron's worth in one go. He closed his eyes, he chewed, he swallowed. "Perfection," he sighed. "The balance, the depth, the sorrow." I beamed. I actually smiled. I did it. "Yes," Drakar said, "just one small thing." "What?" I asked, panic flaring instantly. "The grind," Drakar said, a frown creasing his brow. "There was a grit, a slight texture. Did you add pepper?" "No," I said, "only the truffle." Drakar scratched his chin. "Perhaps a bit of dust fell in, from the ceiling." "Unlikely, I covered it." "Wait," Drakar said. He looked at his own arm. He scratched a loose scale. It flaked off, turning into a fine, glittering powder as it hit the floor. "Oh," he said. His voice was suddenly very small. "Oh," I asked, "what is O?" I think some of my shedding scale powder might have drifted into the bowl as I ate." "Okay," I said slowly. "Is that bad? It's your own scale." Drakar looked at me with wide, terrified eyes. Elias, he said, do you know the one thing a dragon is biologically incapable of processing? Garlic. No, himself. Himself. Auto-cannibalism intolerance, Drakar whispered. If I consume even a microgram of my own scales. What happens? Drakar's stomach made a noise. It wasn't a gurgle. It wasn't a rumble. It was a tick, like a clock. Click, click, click. It triggers a biological reaction, Drakar said, backing away, known as the supernova sneeze. Supernova. Run, Drakar said. Run, Elias, run now. Click, 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 click. But the payment, I yelled. Run, Drakar roared. He inhaled. The inhalation lasted for 10 seconds. The air was sucked out of the room. The fire in the magma vent was pulled into his nostrils. Coins from the hoard were dragged across the floor. I turned and sprinted toward the tunnel. I didn't look back. I dove behind a massive stalagmite just as Drakar let it out. It wasn't a sound, it was a force of nature. The shockwave hit me like a physical hammer. The stalagmite shattered, the floor buckled. I was lifted off my feet and thrown 50 yards down the tunnel. The world turned white, then orange, then black. Rubble rained down on me. I curled into a ball, shielding my head with my copper pan. Why, I whimpered into the darkness as a boulder sealed the tunnel entrance. Did I not just open a sandwich shop? End of part 3. I woke up to the distinct sensation of a rock digging into my spleen. The air in the tunnel wasn't just dusty, it was solid. It tasted of powdered limestone, ancient grime, and the lingering, spicy aftertaste of dragon sneeze. Hello, I croaked. My voice was muffled by the debris. I pushed upward. A few smaller rocks tumbled away, and a beam of orange light pierced the gloom. I dug, clawed actually. I scrabbled through the rubble like a frantic mole, my chef's whites now definitively chef's grays, until I broke the surface. I gasped, inhaling a mixture of smoke and panic. The kitchen cavern was gone. In its place was a caldera of chaos. The magma vent had overflowed, creating rivers of lava that sluggishly chewed through the stone floor. The piles of gold had melted into shimmering, dangerous puddles, and in the center of it all, Drakar was malfunctioning. The supernova sneeze hadn't just cleared his sinuses, it had seemingly rebooted his entire nervous system. He was thrashing. His tail whipped back and forth, smashing stalactites that rained down like jagged hail. His scales were flashing, red, blue, green, plaid, like a disco ball having a seizure. The itch, Drakar roared, scratching his neck against a pillar so hard the stone shrieked. The fire, it burns from the inside. I feel like I swallowed the sun. Drakar, I yelled, scrambling onto a slab of obsidian that was floating in the lava like a raft. Calm down, you're destroying the structural integrity of the mountain. He spun toward me, his eyes were rolling wildly. Smoke poured from his ears. Elias, he bellowed. You live, fix this, my throat is closing, my gizzard is twisting, I need a balm. A balm, I shouted over the roar of collapsing rock. You need a hospital or an exorcist. Cook, he screamed. A glob of fire spit landed 2 feet from my raft, splashing magma onto my shoe. Cook the ultimate soother, use everything, the wormroot, the inferno peppers, the moonbloom, combine them. The chaotic energies will cancel each other out. That's not how chemistry works, I yelled back. Mixing explosive spices doesn't make a sedative, it makes a bomb. Do it, Drakar slammed a claw down, sending a shockwave that nearly capsized my rock raft. Or I shall eat you to settle my stomach. There it was, the ultimatum, cook or be cooked, the story of my life for the past 3 months. I looked at the ruin of my kitchen. My copper pans were melted. My spoons were twisted. But miraculously, my heavy-bottomed saucepan had survived, wedged between 2 rocks. And the pantry, protected by a magical stasis field, was largely intact, though leaning precariously over a pit of fire. I scrambled off the rock and sprinted. Well, hobbled toward the pantry. Fine, I screamed. One ultimate soother coming up, but if this kills us both, I'm charging you overtime in the afterlife. I grabbed the wormroot. It was still screaming, though a bit more hoarsely now. I grabbed the inferno peppers, which had set their basket on fire. I grabbed the moonbloom pollen, the elven mint, risky, but I needed the cool, and the jar of neutralizing nectar I had brewed from the phoenix tears. This wasn't cooking, this was combat. I set the saucepan directly onto a flowing river of lava. It heated instantly. I threw in the peppers. Boom! A mini mushroom cloud of spice rose up. I tossed in the wormroot. Scream hiss. The pan glowed cherry red. More, Drakar wailed, thrashing in the background. He swiped at invisible flies, his claws gouging deep trenches in the walls. It needs to be potent enough to stun a god. I added the moonbloom pollen. The mixture turned a swirling, galaxy purple. I stirred it with a sword I found on the floor because my ladles were gone. The metal of the blade began to sweat. I was in the zone. Despite the terror, despite the fact that my client was a reptilian natural disaster, a part of me, the chef part, the part that loved the heat and the noise, woke up. I remembered the rush of the dinner service at the Gilded Pheasant, the shouting, the clatter, the pressure. This was just that, scaled up, way up. Balance, I muttered, my eyes streaming from the fumes. Heat needs sweet, chaos needs order. I grabbed a hunk of honeycomb, royal bee jelly, stolen from a giant hive last week, and dropped it in. The mixture calmed. It stopped bubbling violently and began to simmer with a thick, glossy sheen. It smelled incredible. It smelled like a thunderstorm wrapped in caramel. "It's ready," I yelled, grabbing the handle with a wet rag. The rag instantly steamed and scorched, searing my palm, but I didn't let go. I ran toward the dragon. "Open up, you overgrown gecko." Drakar stopped thrashing. He unhinged his jaw. His throat was a glowing tunnel of raw, irritated flesh. I threw the contents of the saucepan, liquid, peppers, screaming roots, and all into his mouth. For a second, silence fell over the cavern. Drakar closed his mouth, he swallowed. His eyes went wide, he stood perfectly still. "Oh," he whispered. I braced myself. Was he going to explode, melt, turn into a newt? "Oh," he said again, louder. A blue light began to pulse under his scales. "The heat. It fights the itch, the cool. It soothes the burn, the pollen. It makes me feel floated." He slumped down, his massive body relaxing into the molten gold. He sighed. A ring of smoke, perfectly shaped like a heart, puffed out of his nose. "It is," Drakar murmured, blinking slowly. "Divine, Elias, you are a wizard of the wok, a sorcerer of the sauté." I collapsed onto my knees, panting. "It worked." "It worked," Drakar rumbled contentedly. "The allergy is neutralized. I am full. I am at peace. You have saved me, little chef." I laughed, a hysterical, high-pitched giggle that bubbled out of my soot-stained throat. "I did it. I actually did it." "Yes," Drakar said. "The combination of the wormroot and the inferno pepper was inspired. Truly." Then he frowned. My laughter stopped. "What?" "Wait," Drakar said. He sat up slightly. "Wormroot and inferno pepper." "Yes," I said slowly. "You told me to mix them." "I did," Drakar admitted. "But, did you use the red wormroot or the purple wormroot?" "Red. It was the only one I found screaming." Drakar's eyes dilated. "Ah." What is ah?" "Red wormroot," Drakar said, his voice trembling, "when combined with inferno pepper, creates a compound known as seismic gastric distension." "Seismic, gastric." "It means," Drakar said, looking at his stomach which had suddenly swollen to the size of a small moon, "gas." "Gas." "Not regular gas, Elias," Drakar whispered, backing away from me. "Tectonic gas, world-ending flatulence." "Oh no," I whispered. Drakar looked at me with genuine apology. "I really liked the risotto, Elias. You were my favorite." "You were." Drakar clenched his teeth. His stomach rumbled. It sounded like the earth cracking open. SCRE rumble boom. It wasn't a belch, it was an eruption. It came from the other end. The explosion that followed is difficult to describe with mere words. It was a blast of concussive force that blew the back of the mountain out. The shockwave picked up the gold, the lava, the rocks, and me. I flew. I remember seeing the ceiling of the cave peel back like a sardine can lid. I remember seeing the sky, blue, beautiful, indifferent, spinning wildly. I remember soaring over a forest, trailing smoke like a shooting star. And then, impact. I landed in a snowbank. Soft, cold, forgiving snow. I tumbled, rolled, and came to a stop at the base of a pine tree 3 miles from the lair. I lay there for a long time, staring up at the plume of smoke rising from high peak. The mountain looked shorter than it used to be. I checked my limbs, arms attached, legs attached. I reached up to my forehead. Smooth, hairless, again. I sighed, I sat up. Something heavy was in my pocket. I reached in and pulled it out. A gold nugget, the size of a grapefruit. It must have been blasted into my pocket during the explosion. I stared at the gold. Then I looked at the smoking mountain, then back at the gold. I quit, I said to the squirrel watching me from a branch. 6 months later. The sign above the door creaked in the gentle breeze. It read, "The Singed Eyebrow." Inside, the tavern was warm, smelling of roasted chicken, hearty stew, and fresh bread. Not a speck of gold in sight. The tables were wood, not obsidian. The stove was a normal, wood-burning iron range that didn't try to eat me. I stood behind the counter, wiping down a mug. I had eyebrows again. They were bushy, magnificent, and most importantly, unscorched. A customer walked in, a traveler, dusty from the road. He sat down at the bar. "Evenin'," he grunted. "What's good?" "The stew is excellent," I said. "Beef and barley, slow-cooked, no magma involved." He laughed. "Sounds good. Say, I heard a rumor. They say you used to cook for the Dragon of High Peak." I paused. I looked at the traveler. I touched the scar on my palm where the saucepan handle had burned me. "I did," I said. "Is it true?" the traveler asked, leaning in. "Is it true he ate nights, that he breathed fire, that he had a hoard of millions?" "All true," I said, "but let me tell you the real horror story." The tavern went quiet. People leaned in. The real horror, I said, pouring him a ale, was his dietary restrictions. "Restrictions?" "Picky," I said, shuddering. He was picky. No garlic, texture issues, allergies to his own face. One time I had to harvest pollen from a fairy who bit me. The traveler chuckled. "Sounds like a nightmare." "It was," I said. "Being a dragon's personal chef sucked. It really, really sucked. The hours were terrible, the workplace was lethal, and the client was a gas-filled bomb waiting to go off." I set the ale down. "But," I added, patting the heavy bag of gold coins under the counter, my retirement fund, courtesy of the severance package blasted into my pocket. The severance pay wasn't bad. The traveler took a sip. "Well, I'm glad you're here now. This stew smells amazing." "It is," I said. I took a ladle and stirred the pot. No screaming roots, no burning peppers, just food. Honest, simple, non-explosive food. "Is there anything in it I should know about?" the traveler asked. "I have a mild allergy to peanuts." I froze. The ladle stopped mid-stir. "Peanuts?" I asked slowly. "Yeah, just get a little rash. Nothing major." I looked at him. I looked at the door. I looked at my eyebrows. "Get out," I said. "What?" "Get out," I pointed to the door. "No allergies, no picky eaters. Eat the stew or starve. I am not going back down that road. Out." The traveler scrambled away, bewildered. The regulars laughed. They knew. I went back to stirring my stew, humming a little tune. Outside, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of dragon-scale orange. I was safe. I was solvent, and I had hair. Life was good. And if I ever saw a lizard larger than my thumb again, I was going to hit it with a frying pan. "Order up," I called out, ringing the bell. And for the first time in a long time, nothing exploded.